Just get her a water next time. Clearly she can't afford anything else. The words sliced through the cozy morning chatter of Sunrise Grounds like a blade, and every conversation in the family-owned coffee shop suddenly died. I felt my cheeks burn as 30 pairs of eyes turned toward our corner table, where my own daughter had just publicly humiliated me in front of half the town. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the woman she was dismissing as a financial burden had once commanded 12,000 soldiers and held a security clearance that could reshape nations. Before we jump back in, tell me where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I should have seen it coming, really. The warning signs had been there for months, scattered like breadcrumbs leading to this moment of complete humiliation. My daughter Rebecca had been dropping hints about my situation ever since I'd moved to Millbrook Falls 6 months ago, after my mandatory retirement from the Army. At 62, apparently I'd become what she considered a family liability, rather than the woman who'd spent 4 decades serving her country with distinction. The morning had started innocently enough. Rebecca had called me Tuesday evening with unusual warmth in her voice, suggesting we meet for coffee to catch up properly since I'd settled into my new retirement. She'd chosen Sunrise Grounds, a charming little place on Main Street that had become my quiet refuge in the small Vermont town. I'd discovered it during my second week here, drawn by the hand-painted sign and the promise of simple coffee without pretense. What I loved about Sunrise Grounds wasn't its Instagram-worthy aesthetic or trendy menu, though the owner, Maria Santos, had created something genuinely special with her mismatched vintage furniture and walls lined with local artwork. It was the authenticity of the place, the way it felt like stepping into someone's well-loved kitchen rather than a calculated business venture. Maria herself was usually behind the counter, a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair always pulled back in a practical bun, and flour dusting her apron from the pastries she baked fresh each morning. I'd been coming here twice a week since arriving in Millbrook Falls, always ordering the same thing: a small black coffee, and, if I was feeling indulgent, one of Maria's homemade blueberry scones. It wasn't about the money. Despite what Rebecca apparently believed, my military pension and savings were more than adequate for a comfortable retirement. It was about finding simple pleasures after decades of complexity, about discovering who I was when I wasn't wearing stars on my collar or making decisions that affected thousands of lives. The routine had become precious to me in a way I struggled to explain. After 40 years of structured military life where every moment was scheduled and every decision carried weight, these quiet mornings felt like a luxury beyond measure. I'd sit in the corner table by the window, usually with a paperback novel, or sometimes just watching the small-town life unfold on Main Street. Maria had learned my order after the 3rd visit, and we'd developed the kind of comfortable acquaintance that forms naturally between people who respect each other's space. This morning, though, everything felt different from the moment I walked through the door. Rebecca was already there, seated at a prominent table in the center of the cafe rather than my usual quiet corner. She wasn't alone. My son-in-law David sat beside her, looking uncomfortable in the way he always did when Rebecca was orchestrating something. Across from them sat my other daughter, Jennifer, who'd apparently driven up from Boston without mentioning she'd be here. The staging felt deliberate, like a business meeting rather than a family coffee date. Rebecca had positioned herself with her back to the wall, facing the room like she was holding court. Jennifer kept checking her phone with the impatient efficiency of someone who had more important places to be. David was studying the menu with the intense focus of a man trying to avoid eye contact. "Mom!" Rebecca's voice carried across the cafe with artificial brightness. "Over here. I got us the good table." I made my way over, already sensing the undercurrent of tension that seemed to follow Rebecca like her expensive perfume. She dressed for the occasion: designer jeans, cashmere sweater, jewelry that caught the morning light streaming through the windows. Everything about her appearance screamed success, from her professionally highlighted hair to her manicured nails. She looked like what she was: a successful real estate agent who'd built her identity around appearing prosperous. Jennifer offered a genuine smile as I approached, though I could see the wariness in her eyes. As a nurse, she'd inherited my ability to read situations quickly, and she was clearly picking up on whatever dynamic Rebecca orchestrated. David stood politely as I sat down, his Midwestern manners intact despite his obvious discomfort. "This is nice," I said, settling into the chair Rebecca had saved for me. It's unexpected, but nice. What's the occasion? Rebecca's smile had that particular quality that meant she was about to deliver what she considered good news. Can't a daughter want to spend time with her mother? Besides, we need to talk about some practical things. The word practical in Rebecca's vocabulary usually meant money, and specifically how other people should be spending theirs differently. I learned this during her teenage years when practical meant I should buy her a more expensive car because it would be safer. In her 20s, practical meant I should help with her down payment because real estate was an investment. Now, apparently, practical meant something entirely different. Maria appeared at our table with her usual quiet efficiency, order pad in hand and a warm smile that felt genuine after Rebecca's calculated brightness. "Good morning, ladies. David, the usual for you, Mrs. Williams?" "Please," I said gratefully. "Small black coffee." "And one of your wonderful blueberry scones?" Maria asked, pen poised. This is where it started to go wrong. Before I could answer, Rebecca's voice cut through the moment like a knife. "Oh, she won't be having the scone today, just the coffee, the small one." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Maria's pen hesitated over her pad, and I saw confusion flicker across her features. In 6 months of serving me, she'd never heard anyone else speak for my order. "Actually," I began, but Rebecca was already waving her hand dismissively. "Trust me, the coffee is fine. She's watching her budget these days." Rebecca's voice carried just far enough for the neighboring tables to hear, and I felt heat creep up my neck. "We all need to be more mindful about unnecessary expenses, don't you?" Maria looked between us with the careful neutrality of someone who'd learned to navigate family dynamics in her business. "Of course. One small black coffee. And for the rest of you." Rebecca ordered an elaborate specialty drink that cost 3 times what my coffee and scone would have combined. Jennifer asked for a simple latte, shooting me an apologetic look that suggested she was as confused as I was. David mumbled something about a medium coffee with cream. As Maria walked away, Rebecca leaned forward with the expression she'd worn as a child when she was about to explain why something was really my fault. "So, Mom, we've been talking and we think it's time to have an honest conversation about your finances." The words hit me like a physical blow. "My finances?" "Don't get defensive," Rebecca said quickly, though I hadn't said anything remotely defensive. "We're family. We care about you, but we've been watching and we're concerned about some of your choices since you've moved here." Jennifer was staring at her sister with unconcealed disbelief. "Rebecca, what are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that Mom's been living like she's on some kind of strict budget."
Look at her. Look at how she dresses, where she lives, what she orders when we go out. It's not healthy to be so restrictive. I looked down at my clothes, clean jeans, a comfortable flannel shirt, and the walking shoes I'd bought after my doctor recommended daily exercise. They were practical choices, comfortable and appropriate for a woman who was finally free to dress for herself, rather than for inspections and ceremonies. "There's nothing wrong with my clothes," I said quietly. "That's exactly what I'm talking about," Rebecca said, her voice taking on the patronizing tone she used with difficult clients. "You're living like you can't afford anything better, but that's not necessary anymore. David and I have been talking, and we want to help." David shifted uncomfortably in his chair, and I had the distinct impression this was the first he was hearing about their alleged conversations. Maria returned with our drinks, and the momentary interruption felt like a blessed relief. "Here we go," Maria said, setting down my simple black coffee with the same care she'd always shown. "Small black coffee for Mrs. Williams?" "See?" Rebecca said the moment Maria stepped away. "It's always the smallest, cheapest thing on the menu. Mom, you don't have to live like this anymore." The cafe had gotten busier during our conversation, and I was becoming increasingly aware that our table was attracting attention. The family at the table next to us had stopped their own conversation and were clearly listening. An older man reading a newspaper near the window kept glancing our way. Even the college students in the corner booth had lowered their voices and were watching our drama unfold. "Rebecca," I said, trying to keep my voice level, "I think you're misunderstanding something." "Am I?" she challenged. "When's the last time you bought yourself something nice? When's the last time you ordered the meal you actually wanted instead of whatever was cheapest?" Jennifer finally found her voice. Rebecca, stop. You're embarrassing her. I'm trying to help her, Rebecca shot back. Someone needs to. Look, Mom, I know retirement can be scary. I know adjusting to a fixed income is hard, but you don't have to suffer through it alone. The words fixed income seemed to echo through the cafe, and I felt the weight of every stare. Rebecca had managed to paint me as a struggling retiree barely scraping by, and she was doing it with the confidence of someone who believed she was being helpful. The thing is, Rebecca continued, warming to her theme, David and I have been very blessed financially. My real estate business is booming, and David's practice is doing incredibly well. We want to share that blessing with family. David was now actively trying to disappear into his coffee cup, and I didn't blame him. Rebecca was building towards something, and experience had taught me that her grand gestures usually came with strings attached. So, we've set up a small monthly allowance, she announced, pulling an envelope from her purse with a flourish. Nothing huge, but enough so you can stop worrying about every dollar. Enough so you can order the scone next time. The silence that followed was deafening. I stared at the envelope in her outstretched hand, understanding finally hitting me like a freight train. My daughter, the child I'd raised while managing a military career, the young woman whose college education I'd funded, whose wedding I'd paid for despite being deployed overseas, was offering me an allowance. Rebecca, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, put that away. Mom, don't be proud. Pride doesn't keep you fed. That was when I snapped, not loudly, not dramatically, but something inside me crystallized into diamond-hard clarity. I looked around the cafe at all the faces watching our family drama unfold, at the pity in their eyes, at the way they were seeing me, a pathetic, old woman whose daughter had to give her spending money to afford coffee shop pastries. You think I can't afford a scone? I asked quietly. It's not about what you can afford, Rebecca said, her voice taking on that careful tone people use with the elderly or confused. It's about not having to worry about it. You think I'm living on a fixed income that's so small I have to count pennies. Mom, there's no shame in it. Lots of people struggle after retirement. The important thing is accepting help when it's offered. That was when my temper finally broke through 40 years of military discipline. I stood up so quickly, my chair scraped against the floor, and the sound cut through the cafe chatter like a gunshot. I don't need your help, Rebecca. My voice was steady, but carrying, and I saw heads turn throughout the cafe. I don't need your allowance, and I don't need you to speak for me or manage my finances or decide what I can and cannot afford. Rebecca's face flushed red. Mom, sit down. You're making a scene. I'm making a scene? I looked around at all the faces staring at us. You've been making a scene since we sat down. You've been announcing to everyone in this cafe that your mother is too poor to buy her own coffee, too helpless to manage her own life, too proud to accept charity from her successful daughter. That's exactly what you've been doing. I was aware that my voice had picked up the tone I'd once used to address rooms full of officers, the voice that expected to be heard and obeyed. You've been performing your generosity for an audience, using my supposed poverty as a prop in your own story about what a caring daughter you are. Jennifer finally found her voice. Rebecca, stop. You're embarrassing her. I'm trying to help her, Rebecca shot back. Someone needs to. Look, Mom, I know retirement can be scary. I know adjusting to a fixed income is hard, but you don't have to suffer through it alone. The words fixed income seemed to echo through the cafe, and I felt the weight of every stare. Rebecca had managed to paint me as a struggling retiree barely scraping by, and she was doing it with the confidence of someone who believed she was being helpful. The thing is, Rebecca continued, warming to her theme, David and I have been very blessed financially. My real estate business is booming, and David's practice is doing incredibly well. We want to share that blessing with family. David was now actively trying to disappear into his coffee cup, and I didn't blame him. Rebecca was building towards something, and experience had taught me that her grand gestures usually came with strings attached. "So, we've set up a small monthly allowance," she announced, pulling an envelope from her purse with a flourish. "Nothing huge, but enough so you can stop worrying about every dollar. Enough so you can order the scone next time." The silence that followed was deafening. I stared at the envelope in her outstretched hand, understanding finally hitting me like a freight train. My daughter, the child I'd raised while managing a military career, the young woman whose college education I'd funded, whose wedding I'd paid for despite being deployed overseas, was offering me an allowance. "Rebecca," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "put that away." "Mom, don't be proud. Pride doesn't keep you fed." That was when I snapped. Not loudly, not dramatically, but something inside me crystallized into diamond-hard clarity. I looked around the cafe at all the faces watching our family drama unfold, at the pity in their eyes, at the way they were seeing me, a pathetic, old woman whose daughter had to give her spending money to afford coffee shop pastries. "You think I can't afford a scone?" I asked quietly. "It's not about what you can afford," Rebecca said, her voice taking on that careful tone people use with the elderly or confused. "It's about not having to worry about it. You think I'm living on a fixed income that's so small I have to count pennies. Mom, there's no shame in it. Lots of people struggle after retirement. The important thing is accepting help when it's offered." That was when my temper finally broke through 40 years of military discipline. I stood up so quickly, my chair scraped against the floor, and the sound cut through the cafe chatter like a gunshot. "I don't need your help, Rebecca." My voice was steady but carrying, and I saw heads turn throughout the cafe. "I don't need your allowance, and I don't need you to speak for me or manage my finances or decide what I can and cannot afford." Rebecca's face flushed red. "Mom, sit down. You're making a scene." "I'm making a scene?" I looked around at all the faces staring at us. "You've been making a scene since we sat down. You've been announcing to everyone in this cafe that your mother is too poor to buy her own coffee, too helpless to manage her own life, too proud to accept charity from her successful daughter. That's exactly what you've been doing." I was aware that my voice had picked up the tone I'd once used to address rooms full of officers, the voice that expected to be heard and obeyed. "You've been performing your generosity for an audience, using my supposed poverty as a prop in your own story about what a caring daughter you are." Jennifer was staring at both of us with wide eyes, clearly caught between wanting to disappear and wanting to defend someone, though she seemed unsure who needed defending. Rebecca's voice rose to match mine. "I was trying to help you. I was trying to make sure you don't have to live like you're...
It's you needing me to be less so you can be more." The words hung in the air between us, and I could see in Rebecca's face that they'd hit their mark. She'd gone pale under her carefully applied makeup, and her hands were shaking slightly as she finally lowered the envelope. "That's not fair," she whispered. "Isn't it?" I sat back down, suddenly exhausted. "Rebecca, I love you, but I don't need you to save me from a life I've chosen. I don't need you to rescue me from circumstances that exist only in your imagination." The cafe around us was still unnaturally quiet, and I became aware that we'd provided the morning entertainment for everyone's coffee break. The embarrassment I'd felt earlier was gone, replaced by something harder and cleaner. The satisfaction of standing up for myself, even if it had come at the cost of our family relationship. Maria appeared at our table as if summoned, her expression carefully neutral, but her eyes kind. "Is everything all right here? Can I get anyone anything else?"
Rebecca was staring down at the envelope in her hands like she couldn't figure out how it had gotten there. Jennifer was looking between her sister and me with the expression of someone trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. David was clearly wishing he'd stayed home. "Actually," I said, looking directly at Maria, "I think I will have that blueberry scone after all. And maybe you could tell me about those chocolate croissants I saw in the case. They looked wonderful." Maria's professional mask slipped slightly, and I caught a glimpse of something that might have been approval. "Of course. The croissants are fresh this morning. French butter, Belgian chocolate. They're quite popular." "Perfect. I'll take one of those as well." Rebecca looked up sharply. "Mom, you don't need to—" "You're right," I said calmly. "I don't need to. I want to. There's a difference." As Maria walked away to get my order, I could feel the tension at our table settling into something new and uncomfortable. Rebecca was still holding that envelope, but she seemed to have forgotten about it. Jennifer was looking between her sister and me with the expression of someone trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. David was clearly wishing he'd stayed home. "Actually," I said, looking directly at Maria, "I think I will have that blueberry scone after all. And maybe you could tell me about those chocolate croissants I saw in the case. They looked wonderful." Maria's professional mask slipped slightly, and I caught a glimpse of something that might have been approval. "Of course. The croissants are fresh this morning. French butter, Belgian chocolate. They're quite popular." "Perfect. I'll take one of those as well." Rebecca looked up sharply. "Mom, you don't need to—" "You're right," I said calmly. "I don't need to. I want to. There's a difference." As Maria walked away to get my order, I could feel the tension at our table settling into something new and uncomfortable. Rebecca was still holding that envelope, but she seemed to have forgotten about it. Jennifer was studying me with the kind of careful attention she usually reserved for patients showing unexpected symptoms. "Mom," Jennifer said finally, "I'm sorry. I had no idea this was why Rebecca wanted to meet." "It's not your fault," I assured her. "And it's not really Rebecca's fault either. She genuinely thought she was helping." Rebecca's voice was small when she finally spoke. "I was helping, or trying to." "I know you were," I said, and I meant it. "But Rebecca, you've been so focused on what you think I need that you never asked what I actually want." "What do you want?" she asked, and for the first time that morning, she sounded like she actually wanted to hear the answer. It was a good question, and one I'd been grappling with since my retirement. What did I want? For 40 years, what I wanted had been irrelevant. The Army had told me where to go, what to do, how to spend my time. My family had needed me to be strong, reliable, always available when crises arose. I'd been defined by my service, my rank, my responsibilities. "I want to figure out who I am when I'm not General Williams," I said slowly. "I want to discover what I like when no one is watching, what makes me happy when I don't have to consider strategy or consequences or other people's expectations. I want to sit in a coffee shop and order exactly what appeals to me, not what sends the right message or fits the right budget or makes the right impression." Rebecca was listening with an intensity I hadn't seen from her in years. "And that's really what you want? Just simple things?" "Simple things aren't small things," I said. "After 40 years of complexity, simple feels revolutionary." Maria returned with my scone and croissant, arranged beautifully on a small plate with a pat of butter and a tiny jar of what looked like homemade jam. "There we go. Anything else I can get for you, ladies?" "Actually," Rebecca said suddenly, her voice uncertain but determined, "could I get one of those croissants too? And maybe you could tell me about the jam." Maria's smile was genuine this time. "The jam is my grandmother's recipe, strawberry rhubarb. I make it in small batches every spring." As Maria walked away again, Rebecca looked at me with something that might have been understanding. "I'm sorry, Mom. I really thought I was helping." "I know you did," I said, breaking off a piece of the scone. It was perfect, tender and buttery with bursts of sweet blueberry. "But Rebecca, I need you to trust me to live my own life, even if it looks different from yours." She nodded slowly, still turning that envelope in her hands. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Are you really okay? Financially, I mean." I smiled at her concern, which felt genuine for the first time that morning. "Rebecca, I spent 40 years in the Army. I retired as a 2-star general. My pension alone is probably more than you think, and I was careful with my investments. I could afford to eat every meal in this cafe for the next 20 years without touching my savings." Her eyes widened. "Really? Really?" I took a sip of my coffee, savoring the simplicity of it.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I order black coffee because I like black coffee. I buy comfortable clothes because I've earned the right to be comfortable. I live quietly because for the first time in my adult life, I can. The envelope finally disappeared back into Rebecca's purse, and I saw her shoulders relax in a way they hadn't since I'd arrived. I feel pretty stupid right now. "Don't," I said firmly. "You saw what you thought was a problem, and you tried to solve it. That's not stupid. It's loving. You just didn't have all the information." Jennifer had been quiet through this exchange, but now she leaned forward with curiosity. "Mom, what was it really like? The Army, I mean. You never talked about it much when we were growing up." I considered the question while I spread jam on my scone. How do you explain 4 decades of service to daughters who grew up seeing only the homework help in soccer games, not the deployments and decisions that shaped nations? "It was everything," I said finally. "The best and worst of human nature, often in the same day. It was honor and bureaucracy, courage and politics, brotherhood and loneliness. It was knowing that your decisions affected thousands of lives and somehow finding the strength to make them anyway." "You miss it?" Rebecca asked, and I could hear genuine curiosity in her voice. "Parts of it," I admitted. "I missed the sense of purpose, the clarity of mission. I miss leading people who trusted me to make the right choices. But I don't miss the weight of it, the constant pressure, the way everything you did mattered to someone you'd never meet." David, who had been silent through most of our conversation, finally spoke up. "That must have been incredibly difficult." "It was, but it was also incredibly rewarding." I looked around the table at my family, really seeing them for the first time that morning. The hardest part wasn't the job itself. It was coming home and trying to be just Mom when the rest of the world knew me as General Williams. Rebecca's expression had changed completely from the patronizing concern she'd shown earlier. Now she was looking at me with something that might have been respect, or maybe just recognition that I was more complex than she'd realized. "I never thought about that," she said quietly. "I never thought about what it must have been like to switch between those roles." "Most people don't," I said, and there was no accusation in it, just fact. Military families live in a strange space where the service member belongs partly to the country and partly to the family, but never entirely to either. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of the cafe door chiming, and I looked up to see a group of men in their 50s and 60s entering together. They had the bearing that comes from military service: straight backs, alert eyes, the way they automatically scanned the room before choosing their table. One of them caught my eye and nodded with the kind of respectful acknowledgement that passes between veterans. Maria greeted them with obvious familiarity, and I gathered from their easy interaction that they were regulars. They settled at a large table near the back, their conversation animated but respectful of the other customers. "Friends of yours?" Jennifer asked, following my gaze. "No, but we share something in common." Rebecca was watching the group with new interest. "How can you tell?" "The way they move, the way they chose their table, the way they're sitting." I gestured subtly toward their group. "Military bearing stays with you long after you take off the uniform." As if to prove my point, one of the men, a tall, lean guy with gray hair and laugh lines around his eyes, approached our table with the confident but respectful manner of someone used to dealing with both authority and courtesy. "Excuse me," he said, addressing me directly. "I don't want to interrupt your family time, but are you General Williams?" The question hung in the air like smoke,
and I felt the dynamic at our table shift once again. Rebecca's eyes went wide, Jennifer sat up straighter, and David stopped pretending to read the menu. "I am," I said simply. The man's face lit up with genuine pleasure. "I thought so. Sergeant Major Tom Chen, retired. I served under Colonel Morrison when you were running ops in Afghanistan. Best commander we ever had, bar none." I felt warmth spread through my chest, not from the recognition, but from the respect in his voice, the way he stood a little straighter when he spoke to me. This was what Rebecca had never seen, never understood about who I had been before I became just her mother. "Thank you, Sergeant Major. That means a great deal. Ma'am, if I don't mind me saying, what you did for our unit during that supply crisis in '09, we never forgot that. You could have let us hang out to dry while the brass figured out their logistics nightmare, but you didn't." I remembered the incident he was referring to. A forward operating base had been cut off from supply lines due to administrative incompetence, and 100 soldiers were facing the possibility of going without essential supplies for weeks. I'd bypassed 3 levels of bureaucracy and called in favors from 2 different commands to get them what they needed. "You were good soldiers. Good soldiers deserve better than bureaucratic failures." "Yes, ma'am." He glanced at my family, clearly aware that he was interrupting something personal. "I just wanted to say thank you and to let you know that your reputation preceded you everywhere you went. It was an honor to serve under your command, even indirectly." After he returned to his table, the silence at ours felt different. Rebecca was staring at me like she was seeing a stranger. Jennifer was thoughtful, and David was seemingly processing new information about his mother-in-law. "Mom, what exactly did you do in the Army?" It was a question she'd never asked before. Not really. Growing up, she knew I was in the Army, knew I traveled sometimes for work, knew that I wore a uniform and had responsibilities, but she'd never asked about the specifics, never wanted to know about the decisions and the weight and the lives that hung in the balance. "I led people," I said simply. "I made decisions. I tried to bring everyone home." "But specifically," Jennifer pressed, "what was your job?" I considered how much to share, how much they could understand about a world they'd never experienced. I spent the last 15 years of my career in strategic operations, planning, coordination, crisis management. When situations went bad in remote locations, my teams were often the ones sent to fix them. Rebecca's expression had changed completely from the patronizing concern she'd shown earlier. Now she was looking at me with something that might have been respect, or maybe just recognition that I was more complex than she'd realized. "I never thought about that," she said quietly. "I never thought about what it must have been like to switch between those roles." "Most people don't," I said, and there was no accusation in it, just fact. Military families live in a strange space where the service member belongs partly to the country and partly to the family, but never entirely to either.
He was being kind. Was he? David asked quietly, because he seemed pretty serious about it. I thought about Sergeant Major Chen and the dozens of other soldiers whose lives had intersected with mine over 4 decades. I thought about the decisions I'd made in windowless rooms that had rippled out to affect people I'd never meet, about the responsibility that had kept me awake at night and the satisfaction that had made it all worthwhile. "I was good at my job," I said finally. "I cared about the people under my command, and I never asked them to do anything I wouldn't do myself. In the military, that goes a long way." "Is that why you don't like to talk about it?" Jennifer asked. "Because it was too heavy?" "Partly," I admitted, "but mostly because when I came home, I wanted to be your mother, not your commanding officer. I wanted to help with homework and drive carpools and worry about normal things like whether you'd remembered your lunch money." Rebecca's laugh was shaky, and here I was worried about whether you could afford lunch money. The irony of it settled around us, and I saw her finally beginning to understand the disconnect between her perception and reality. She'd been so focused on what she saw as my diminished circumstances that she'd missed entirely who I'd been before retirement, what I'd accomplished, what I was still capable of. "I'm really sorry, Mom," she said, and this time her apology carried weight. "I completely misunderstood everything." You saw what you expected to see, I said gently. A retired woman living quietly in a small town. That's not wrong. It's just not complete. Maria appeared at our table again, this time carrying a plate with another pastry, something elaborate with chocolate and what looked like fresh berries. "Compliments of the gentleman at table 6, she said with a smile. "They wanted you to have this with their thanks for your service." I looked over at the table of veterans, and Sergeant Major Chen raised his coffee cup in a small salute. The gesture was simple but meaningful, an acknowledgement between people who understood the weight of service and the value of quiet recognition. "That's very kind," I said to Maria. "Please tell them I'm grateful." As Maria walked away, Rebecca was studying the pastry with the kind of intense focus she usually reserved for real estate contracts. "Mom, can I ask you something else?" "Of course." "When you retired, did you choose to come here, to Millbrook Falls?" I considered the question while I broke off a piece of the gifted pastry. It was some kind of chocolate tart with fresh raspberries and what looked like homemade whipped cream. "I did. I wanted somewhere quiet, somewhere I could figure out who I was without the uniform." "But don't you miss it? The respect, the recognition, the sense of importance?" It was a perceptive question, one that got to the heart of the identity crisis that had driven me to this small Vermont town. "I miss parts of it," I said, honestly. "But, Rebecca, for 40 years I was defined by what I did, not who I was. I commanded respect because of my rank, not because of my character. People listened to me because they had to, not because they wanted to." I gestured around the cafe, at the normal people living normal lives, at Maria behind the counter and the college students in the corner and the family with 2 small children sharing an enormous muffin. Here, no one knows what I used to do. If they respect me, it's because of how I treat them, not because of stars on my collar. If they listen to me, it's because they choose to, not because military protocol demands it. I took another bite of the tart, savoring the burst of raspberry sweetness. There's something liberating about being judged on who you are right now, not who you used to be. Jennifer was nodding slowly. "That makes sense, but doesn't it feel strange, going from commanding thousands of people to this?" "This," I said, looking around at the warm cafe with its mismatched furniture and hand-painted signs, "is exactly what I wanted. After decades of complexity, simple feels like luxury." Rebecca had been quiet during this exchange, but now she leaned forward with an expression I recognized from her childhood, the look she got when she was working through a complicated problem. "Mom, I owe you more than an apology," she said slowly. "I owe you an explanation." "You don't owe me anything." "Yes, I do." She took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "I think I know why I jumped to conclusions about your finances." I waited, sensing that whatever she was about to say had been building for longer than just this morning. "I've been so focused on proving that I'm successful, that I've made it, that I can take care of myself and my family," she said, her words coming faster as the confession built momentum. "And I think somewhere along the way, I decided that meant I needed to take care of you too. Not because you needed it, but because being able to take care of my parents would prove that I'd really made it." The honesty of it hit me like a physical blow, partly because it was so painful and partly because it made so much sense. Rebecca had always been driven by external validation, always needed to prove herself worthy of respect and recognition. So when I saw you living quietly, ordering simple things, not flashing money around, I convinced myself you were struggling because that would give me a chance to be the successful daughter who swoops in to save the day. Jennifer was staring at her sister with something between admiration and shock. "Rebecca, that's horrible," Rebecca finished. "I know. I turned Mom's retirement into a prop in my own success story." "It's not horrible," I said gently. "It's human. You wanted to feel needed, to feel like your success had meaning beyond just accumulating wealth. That's not a bad impulse, even if the execution was flawed." Rebecca's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "But I made you look like some pathetic old woman who couldn't afford coffee." "Yes, you did,"
I agreed, and saw her flinch.
But Rebecca, look around this room now. She followed my gaze, taking in the respectful nods from the table of veterans, Maria's warm efficiency as she served other customers, the way the atmosphere had shifted from pity to something closer to curiosity. What am I looking at? You're looking at people who now know that assumptions can be wrong, that quiet dignity often hides remarkable stories, that respect should be earned rather than assumed. I reached across the table and covered her hand with mine. You didn't destroy my reputation here, Rebecca. You gave everyone a lesson in looking deeper. The tears she'd been holding back finally spilled over, and I saw her youngest self in her face, the little girl who'd been so afraid of disappointing me that she'd sometimes paralyzed herself with anxiety. "I love you, Mom," she said through her tears. "And I'm proud of you. I should have said that first, before anything else." "I love you too," I said simply. "And I'm proud of you too, even when you make mistakes, especially when you own up to them." David had been watching this entire exchange with the careful attention of someone learning new information about his wife, and now he spoke up with quiet thoughtfulness. "Mrs. Williams, can I ask you something?" "Of course. And David, you can call me Sarah. You've been married to my daughter for 8 years. He smiled at that, some of his tension finally easing. "Sarah, then, what you said about wanting to discover who you are without the uniform, are you finding what you're looking for?" It was a good question, one that cut to the heart of my retirement experience. I considered it while I finished the last bite of the chocolate tart, thinking about the past 6 months of quiet mornings and simple pleasures. "I'm starting to," I said. "I'm learning that I like black coffee not because it's efficient or economical, but because I genuinely prefer the taste. I'm discovering that I enjoy reading fiction after decades of reading only briefings and reports. I'm finding out that I'm actually quite good at crossword puzzles, and that I have opinions about gardening that have nothing to do with tactical advantages." Jennifer laughed at that. "Tactical advantages of gardening? You'd be surprised how much military strategy applies to garden planning," I said with mock seriousness. "Location, resources, timing, defense against hostile forces." "Hostile forces like rabbits?" Rebecca asked, her tears drying as she got caught up in the absurdity. "Rabbits are formidable opponents," I said solemnly. "Never underestimate an enemy that can reproduce that quickly and moves in coordinated groups." The laughter that followed felt healing, like we were finally finding our way back to being a family instead of participants in Rebecca's intervention drama. The other customers in the cafe had returned to their own conversations, though I caught occasional glances that suggested our story had become part of the local folklore. "So, what's next?" Jennifer asked. "Now that you're figuring out civilian life, what do you want to do with it?" It was another good question, one I'd been pondering during my quiet mornings in various coffee shops and bookstores around Vermont. What did a retired general do when she was no longer responsible for other people's lives? "I'm thinking about volunteering," I said. "There's a veterans support center about an hour from here that helps military families navigate the transition to civilian life. They've asked if I'd be interested in working with female veterans. Apparently, there's a real need for mentorship and practical support." Rebecca perked up at this. "That sounds perfect for you. It would be part-time, flexible, enough to feel useful without the weight of command responsibility, enough to share what I've learned without having to make life-or-death decisions." "Would you like that?" asked. "Going back to helping military families?" "I think I would," I said, surprising myself with how certain I sounded. "But on my terms this time, as Sarah Williams, who happens to have military experience, not as General Williams, who happens to be a person." Maria approached our table again, this time with coffee refills and a warm smile that suggested she'd been following our conversation from a respectful distance. "Refills for everyone?" she asked, already pouring fresh coffee into my cup. "Thank you," I said. "Maria, I hope we haven't disrupted your morning too much." "Not at all," she said warmly, "though I have to admit I had no idea about your military background. I just knew you as the nice woman who always says please and thank you and never makes a mess." Rebecca laughed at that. That's Mom, polite to a fault. There's nothing wrong with basic courtesy, I said mildly. In fact, after 40 years of working with people under extreme stress, I'd say courtesy might be the most undervalued skill in human interaction. Is that what made you a good commander? Maria asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. Courtesy? I considered the question while she finished serving our refills. What had made me effective as a leader? It wasn't any single quality, but rather a combination of traits that had developed over decades of experience and mistakes. Partly, I said, but mostly it was remembering that every person under my command was someone's child, someone's parent, someone's whole world. When you make decisions that affect people's lives, you'd better be sure you're making them for the right reasons. That's a good way to think about any job, really. As she walked away, Jennifer leaned forward with renewed interest. Mom, will you tell us more about what it was really like? I looked around the table at my family. Rebecca, with her earlier embarrassment replaced by genuine curiosity, Jennifer, with her nurse's instinct for understanding complex situations, David, with his quiet intelligence finally engaged, and I realized that for the first time in years, they were seeing me as something more than just their mother or mother-in-law. What would you like to know?
She wore leggings that probably cost $300 and a matching top that showcased her obviously expensive fitness routine. Her friends flanked her like a well-rehearsed entourage, both brunettes who seemed content to play supporting roles in whatever drama their friend chose to create. They claimed the large table next to ours without asking if anyone was waiting for it, spreading their designer purses and water bottles across the surface like they were marking territory. Their conversation never stopped, a constant stream of names I didn't recognize and events I had no interest in attending. I told Marcus that if he wanted me at the Pemberton Foundation thing, he'd better make sure we get the VIP table, the blonde was saying, her voice carrying across the cafe with the assumption that everyone would be interested in her social calendar. I'm not paying $1,000 a plate to sit with people I don't know. Her friends made appropriately sympathetic noises, while Maria approached their table with the same professional courtesy she showed every customer. I watched the interaction with growing unease, recognizing something in the blonde woman's posture that reminded me of junior officers who'd never learned the difference between authority and arrogance. "Good morning, ladies," Maria said warmly. "What can I get started for you today?" The blonde barely glanced up from her phone. "I need a skinny vanilla latte with oat milk, extra hot, with an extra shot, and make sure the foam is microphone, not that bubbly nonsense. Stephanie wants a green tea, organic only, and Clarissa will have whatever your most expensive coffee drink is because she's celebrating her divorce settlement." The casual rudeness of it made me wince. No please, no thank you, no acknowledgement that Maria was a person rather than a service robot. Just demands delivered with the expectation of immediate compliance. Maria maintained her professional smile, but I caught the slight tightening around her eyes that suggested she was used to dealing with customers like this. "Of course. And would you like to see our pastry case? We have some beautiful items fresh this morning." "God, no," the blonde said, with a laugh that carried no humor. "Do you see these abs? I didn't get them by eating carbs." Her friends laughed dutifully, and I felt Rebecca shift uncomfortably beside me. She was watching the interaction with the expression of someone recognizing behavior she didn't like, but couldn't quite place. "I'll have those drinks right out," Maria said, her voice still pleasant but noticeably cooler. As Maria walked away, the blonde woman's attention seemed to expand beyond her immediate circle for the first time since entering. Her eyes swept the cafe with the calculating assessment of someone evaluating her surroundings for social advantages or threats. Her gaze lingered on our table, taking in our casual clothing and simple coffee orders with the kind of quick evaluation that wealthy women learn to do automatically. I could see her categorizing us: middle-class family, probably locals, definitely not worth networking with. But then her attention focused on me specifically, and I saw something shift in her expression. It was the look of someone who'd found a target for whatever frustration or boredom was driving her that morning. "Excuse me," she called across the space between our tables, her voice pitched to carry throughout the cafe. "Are you finished with your coffee?" The question was clearly directed at me, though I couldn't imagine why she'd want to know. My cup was still half full, and I hadn't made any move to leave. "Not quite," I said politely, unsure what she was getting at. "It's just that you've been nursing that same small coffee for like an hour. Some of us actually want to enjoy our morning without watching someone make a single cup of coffee last all day." The silence that followed was sharp and uncomfortable. I felt every eye in the cafe turn toward our corner, just as they had earlier during Rebecca's misguided intervention. But this felt different, more hostile, more deliberately cruel. Rebecca's face flushed red. "Excuse me, but my mother can drink her coffee however she wants." The blonde woman's laugh was like breaking glass. "Your mother? Oh, this is rich. Let me guess. Family coffee date where mom gets to order the cheapest thing on the menu while everyone else pays." "That's enough," Jennifer said firmly, her nurse's authority coming through clearly. "You're being incredibly rude." "Am I?" The woman stood up, clearly enjoying the attention she was drawing. "I'm just saying what everyone else is thinking. Look at her order. Small, black coffee, period. No pastry, no specialty drink, nothing that actually supports the business. She's basically camping out here for the price of a cup of coffee, while the rest of us are trying to have a civilized morning." I felt the familiar burn of public humiliation, but this time it was different from Rebecca's misguided concern. This was malicious, deliberately designed to embarrass and diminish me. The woman was performing her superiority for an audience, using my quiet presence as a prop in her own drama. "Excuse me," I said quietly, feeling every eye in the cafe focus on me. The woman watched my movement with the satisfied expression of someone she'd found a target for whatever frustration or boredom was driving her that morning. "You're absolutely right," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the sudden silence. "I've been taking up space." The woman's smile widened, clearly expecting some kind of apology or retreat. "I've been taking up space in briefing rooms in the Pentagon while planning operations that kept this country safe. I've been taking up space in forward operating bases in Afghanistan while coordinating supply lines that kept soldiers alive. I've been taking up space in crisis management centers while making decisions that affected thousands of lives." The confidence in her expression flickered slightly, but she wasn't ready to back down. "That's a nice story, but I've been taking up space in medal ceremonies where I was honored for my service to this nation. I've been taking up space in military hospitals visiting wounded soldiers who sacrificed more than you can imagine. I've been taking up space in Arlington National Cemetery burying friends who died defending the freedoms you take for granted." The cafe had gone completely silent now. Even her friends had stopped their supportive murmuring and were staring at me with growing uncertainty. "Ma'am," I continued, my voice taking on the tone I'd once used to address rooms full of colonels and generals, "I have earned the right to take up space anywhere I choose. I have earned the right to order whatever I want, spend whatever I want, and sit wherever I want for however long I want." The woman's face had gone pale under her expensive makeup. "I didn't know. You didn't want to know," I cut her off. "You wanted to make assumptions about someone based on their appearance, their age, their choices. You wanted to perform your superiority for an audience, and you picked the wrong target." That was when Maria appeared beside our table, and I saw something in her expression that I'd never seen before. She was carrying a plate with what looked like an elaborate pastry creation. Layers of flaky dough filled with cream and topped with fresh fruit and what might have been gold leaf. "General Williams," she said clearly, her voice pitched to carry throughout the cafe, "your usual command special is ready." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. I saw comprehension dawn on faces throughout the cafe, saw the blonde woman's mouth fall open, saw her friends exchange panicked glances. "Command special?" Jennifer whispered. Maria set the elaborate pastry in front of me with ceremony that felt deliberate and meaningful. "General Williams has been coming here twice a week for 6 months, she announced to the room. She always orders black coffee and asks about the daily special. When I told her I was thinking of creating a signature dish to honor local veterans, she helped me develop this recipe.
She gestured to the beautiful pastry with obvious pride. Layers represent the different branches of service. The cream filling is infused with Vermont maple syrup to honor local traditions, and the fruit on top represents the sweetness that comes after sacrifice. General Williams helped me perfect every detail, then insisted I not put it on the regular menu because she didn't want any fuss. The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel every person in the cafe reevaluating everything they thought they knew about the quiet woman who ordered simple coffee and sat in the corner booth. "She orders black coffee," Maria continued, her voice gaining strength as she spoke, "because that's what she prefers after decades of drinking whatever was available in mess halls and forward operating bases. She chooses simple things because she's earned the right to appreciate simplicity. And she tips better than anyone else who comes in here, including people who order drinks that cost 4 times as much." The blonde woman looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. Her friends were studiously avoiding eye contact with anyone, suddenly fascinated by their phones and purses and anything that might provide an escape from the social disaster they'd stumbled into. "General," Maria said, turning back to me with genuine warmth, "I'm sorry you had to deal with that. Your service and your sacrifice deserve better." I looked down at the beautiful pastry she'd created, at the careful artistry and obvious love that had gone into every detail. This was what Rebecca had never understood about my relationship with this place. It wasn't about the money, the menu, or the social dynamics. It was about being seen and valued for who I was, not who I appeared to be. "Thank you, Maria," I said simply. "This is beautiful." Sergeant Major Chen and his friends had stood up at their table, and I saw them moving towards us with the coordinated precision of men who understood the significance of what had just happened. The cafe felt charged with energy, like the moment before a storm breaks. "General Williams," Tom Chen said as he approached, his voice carrying the kind of respect that can't be faked or purchased, "it would be our honor if you'd allow us to join you for a few minutes." The blonde woman was gathering her things with frantic urgency, clearly desperate to escape before the situation got any worse for her. But Tom's words stopped her movement, and I saw her realize that leaving now would look like exactly what it was, a retreat in the face of superior force. "Of course, Sergeant Major, I'd welcome the company." As Tom and his friends arranged additional chairs around our extended table, I became aware that the entire cafe was watching this unfold like a masterclass in respect and recognition. The contrast between the woman's performative superiority and the veteran's genuine reverence was impossible to miss. "General," said one of Tom's companions, a stocky man with kind eyes and calloused hands that spoke of years of honest work, "I'm Mike Rodriguez, retired Air Force. I just wanted to say that what you did for joint operations in the Middle East, it saved lives. A lot of lives." "We all did our jobs," I said automatically, but Mike was shaking his head. "No, ma'am. Some people do their jobs. Some people excel at their jobs. But you redefined what the job could be. You made it about bringing people home instead of just completing missions." I felt Rebecca's hand slip into mine under the table, and when I looked at her, I saw tears in her eyes again. But these weren't tears of embarrassment or frustration. These were tears of pride, of finally understanding what she had never known about her mother. "Mom, why didn't you ever tell us?" "Because when I came home, I wanted to be your mother, not your commanding officer. I wanted to worry about your homework and your friendships and whether you were eating enough vegetables. I wanted normal problems instead of life and death decisions." Jennifer was staring at me with the expression of someone seeing a familiar person in entirely new light. "But all those times you helped us with problems, the way you always seemed to know exactly what to do, that wasn't just mom instinct, was it?" "Crisis management skills are transferable," I admitted with a small smile. "Whether you're coordinating a military operation or figuring out how to get 3 kids to different activities at the same time, the principles are pretty similar." David had been quiet through this revelation, but now he spoke up with something like awe in his voice. "Sarah, you commanded thousands of people? You made decisions that affected national security. How did you stand it? It was a question I'd asked myself many times, especially during the difficult years when the weight of responsibility had felt almost unbearable. How do you make decisions when you know that being wrong means people die? How do you sleep at night when thousands of lives depend on your judgment? You do it because someone has to, and because the alternative, not making the decision, not taking the responsibility, means other people suffer for your cowardice. The blonde woman had stopped pretending to gather her things and was now openly listening to our conversation, her face a mask of horrified fascination. I could see her trying to reconcile the woman she had dismissed as a cheap coffee camper with the reality of who I actually was. "But how do you handle being wrong?" Rebecca asked. "How do you live with mistakes when they matter that much?" It was the question that cut closest to the bone, the one that had kept me awake during too many nights over too many years. I thought about the decisions I'd gotten wrong, the people who'd paid the price for my miscalculations, the weight of responsibility that never quite goes away even after you take off the uniform. "You learn from them," I said finally. "You carry them with you so you never forget the cost of being careless or overconfident, and you try to make sure that the people who trust you never pay a higher price than necessary for your mistakes." Tom Chen was nodding slowly. "That's what made you different, General. You never forgot that your decisions affected real people."
Some commanders, they start thinking about numbers and statistics. You always remembered we were somebody's children, somebody's parents. "Because you were," I said simply. "Every single one of you mattered to someone. My job was to make sure you got home to the people who loved you." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of chairs scraping as the blonde woman and her friends finally made their escape. They moved quickly toward the door, clearly hoping to leave without further confrontation or acknowledgement of what had transpired. But as they reached the door, the blonde woman stopped and turned back toward our table. For a moment, I thought she might offer an apology, some acknowledgement of her behavior and misjudgment. Instead, she lifted her chin with the stubborn pride of someone who refused to admit she'd been completely wrong. "Well," she said, loudly enough for the entire cafe to hear, "I still think it's weird to nurse 1 cup of coffee all morning." The statement hung in the air like a challenge, and I felt the temperature in the room drop several degrees. Tom Chen's expression hardened, and I saw his friends exchange glances that suggested they were not inclined to let this final insult pass without comment. But before anyone could respond, Maria spoke up from behind the counter with the quiet authority of someone who'd finally had enough. "Ma'am," she said clearly, "General Williams has a standing reservation at that table every Tuesday and Friday morning. She pays for a full meal whether she orders it or not, and she's been doing so since her 2nd week coming here. The command special you just saw? She helped me develop it as a fundraiser for the local Veterans Center, and she's personally funded every ingredient that goes into it." The blonde woman's face went white, then red, then white again as the implications of Maria's words sank in. She'd been lecturing a woman about financial responsibility while that woman was quietly subsidizing the very cafe she was criticizing her for using. "Furthermore," Maria continued, her voice gaining strength with each word, "General Williams tips every server, busser, and kitchen worker in this place every time she comes in. She's helped 3 of my employees with college applications, written recommendation letters for 2 others, and last month she quietly paid the heating bill when we were short on cash." I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment at having my private generosity made public, but Maria wasn't finished. "So, when you talk about people who support local businesses versus people who take up space," she said with ice-cold precision, "you might want to make sure you know which category you're actually in." The blonde woman opened her mouth as if to respond, then apparently thought better of it. She pushed through the door with her friends trailing behind her, leaving behind an atmosphere charged with vindication and barely suppressed laughter. As the door closed behind them, the cafe erupted in spontaneous applause. Not the polite golf clap of social obligation, but genuine appreciation for witnessing justice served with surgical precision.
Maria, I said, standing up to face her, you didn't need to do that. Yes, I did, she said firmly. General, you've been nothing but kind and respectful to everyone who works here. You treat us like human beings, not service robots. And you've never once made anyone feel small or insignificant. She gestured toward the door the women had just exited through. That woman tried to humiliate you for being exactly the kind of customer every business should want: thoughtful, generous, and respectful. She needed to understand what she was really looking at. Tom Chen raised his coffee cup in a toast to General Williams, a leader who never forgot that leadership is about service, not status. The other customers in the cafe joined the toast, raising their own cups and mugs in acknowledgement. I felt overwhelmed by the sudden outpouring of respect and support, especially after the morning's earlier embarrassments. To all of you, I said, raising my own cup, for reminding me that community isn't about where you've been or what you've done. It's about how you treat each other right now, in this moment. As I sat back down, Rebecca reached over and squeezed my hand. Mom, I owe you another apology. Rebecca, you don't. Yes, I do, she said firmly. This morning, I was worried about you being seen as someone who couldn't afford coffee and pastries. But you've been here for months, building relationships, supporting local business, helping people, and earning genuine respect. I was so focused on how things looked that I completely missed how things actually were. Jennifer nodded in agreement. And we never asked about any of this. We never asked about your life here, your routine, the people you've met. We just assumed we knew what retirement looked like for you. David was shaking his head with something like amazement. Sarah, you've built an entire community here. These people don't just know you, they respect you. They care about you. They've got your back when someone tries to diminish you. It wasn't intentional, I said honestly. I was just trying to find a place to be myself, without the weight of rank or responsibility. But I discovered that you can't really separate who you are from how you treat people. Military bearing, civilian bearing, it's all just about respect and kindness and remembering that everyone has a story. Mike Rodriguez leaned forward with curiosity. General, can I ask what you're planning to do with this? With retirement, I mean? I thought about the conversation with the Veterans Center, about the possibility of helping other military families navigate the transition to civilian life. I'm thinking about volunteer work, helping other veterans figure out who they are when they're not defined by their service anymore. That's perfect, Tom said immediately. Ma'am, if you don't mind me saying, what happened here this morning, both with your daughter and with that other woman, that's exactly what a lot of veterans face when they transition out. People making assumptions about what they're capable of, what they're worth, what they need. The identity crisis is real, agreed Mike. One day you're responsible for million-dollar equipment and hundreds of people, and the next day you're just another civilian trying to figure out how to order coffee without sounding like you're giving a briefing. The laughter that followed was knowing and warm, the kind of shared understanding that comes from common experience. I looked around the table at these men who'd found their way to civilian life, who had built new identities and new communities while carrying the discipline and values their military service had instilled in them. How did you do it? I asked. How did you figure out who you were supposed to be? Same way you did, Tom said simply. We found places where we could be useful without being in charge. We found people who valued what we had to offer without needing us to save the world every day. And we found each other, Mike added. Having people who understand what you've been through, what you've sacrificed, what you carry, that makes all the difference. I thought about my 6 months in Millbrook Falls, about the quiet mornings and simple pleasures I'd been defending to Rebecca earlier. But I was beginning to understand that it hadn't just been about simplicity. It had been about finding my place in a community that valued contribution over rank, character over credentials. General, Maria said, approaching our table with fresh coffee and what looked like pieces of the command special for everyone. I hope you don't mind, but I called the Veterans Center while you were talking. They'd love to have you come in for a conversation whenever you're ready. I'd like that. I'd like that very much. Rebecca was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Mom, are you happy? Really happy, I mean?
It was a simple question with a complex answer. Was I happy? I thought about the morning's humiliations and revelations, about the discovery that my quiet retirement had actually been the building of a new kind of life. I'm getting there, I said honestly. I'm learning that happiness isn't about having everything you want. It's about appreciating what you have and finding ways to share it with people who matter. Even when those people include daughters who try to give you allowances? Rebecca asked with a rueful smile. Especially then, I said, squeezing her hand, because those daughters care enough to worry about you, even when they're worrying about the wrong things. The conversation continued for another hour, flowing between stories of military service and civilian transition, between family dynamics and community building, between the weight of the past and the possibilities of the future. The cafe around us returned to its normal rhythms, but our corner table had become something special. A gathering place for people who understood that respect isn't about status, that service doesn't end with retirement, and that community is built one genuine interaction at a time. When we finally prepared to leave, Tom Chen stood up with military precision. "General, it's been an honor. I hope we'll see you here again soon." "Every Tuesday or Friday," I confirmed. "Same table, same time." "And the same order?" Rebecca asked with a smile. I looked at the beautiful command special that Maria had created, at the elaborate pastry that represented everything I'd tried to leave behind and everything I was learning to embrace again. "Maybe it's time to mix things up a little," I said. "After all, simple doesn't have to mean static." As we gathered our things and prepared to face the rest of the day, I realized that the morning had been about more than just defending my choices or correcting people's assumptions. It had been about discovering that retirement didn't mean becoming invisible or irrelevant. It meant finding new ways to be visible and relevant, new ways to serve and lead and contribute. And maybe, just maybe, it meant learning that the command special had been waiting for me all along. 3 months later, I was sitting in the same corner booth at Sunrise Grounds, but everything else had changed. The table that had once been my solitary refuge now hosted what had become known around town as the Tuesday Morning Strategic Coffee Council. Though we'd never officially called it that, the name had emerged organically from Maria's gentle teasing about the way our conversations often sounded like military briefings crossed with therapy sessions. The morning light streaming through the windows caught the small brass nameplate that had appeared on the table 2 weeks after what Rebecca now referred to as the incident. Maria had commissioned it from a local artisan, and it simply read, "Reserved for community leaders, Tuesday and Friday mornings." She'd refused to let me pay for it, insisting that it was a business investment rather than a personal gesture. Around the table sat an unlikely collection of people who'd somehow become essential to my new understanding of what retirement could look like. Tom Chen occupied the chair to my right, having appointed himself unofficial coordinator of what he called Veteran Integration Services, which seemed to mostly involve connecting newly retired military personnel with local businesses and community organizations that could use their skills. Across from me, Jennifer had driven up from Boston for her monthly visit, though these days she came more to participate in our discussions than to check on my well-being. She'd surprised everyone, including herself, by developing a passionate interest in veteran healthcare issues and had started incorporating trauma-informed care training into her nursing practice. Rebecca sat beside her sister, no longer the worried daughter trying to manage my finances, but rather a valuable contributor who discovered that her real estate expertise made her invaluable in helping veterans find appropriate housing. She'd also quietly become one of the most effective fundraisers for the Veterans Center, using her social connections and professional network to generate support for programs she'd never known existed before our morning of mutual revelation. David had claimed the chair at the end of the table, his laptop open as he took notes on our conversation. What had started as polite attendance at family coffee dates had evolved into genuine engagement with issues he'd never considered before. His legal background had proven useful in navigating the bureaucratic challenges that many veterans faced when accessing benefits or services. Maria moved between our table and her other customers with the easy efficiency of someone who'd learned to balance business needs with community building. She'd become more than just our server or even our friend.
She was the keeper of stories, the connector of people, the one who remembered that the new veteran who'd moved to town might benefit from meeting the retired general who'd figured out how to build a civilian life worth living. The conversation this morning had started with Tom's update on the 3 new veteran families who'd moved to the area in the past month, but it had evolved into something deeper and more complex. We were talking about purpose, about the challenge of finding meaningful work when your previous meaningful work had involved life-and-death decisions on a scale most people couldn't imagine. The thing is, Tom was saying, gesturing with his coffee cup for emphasis, we spend 20 or 30 years being useful in ways that most civilians can't understand or appreciate. Then we retire, and suddenly we're supposed to be satisfied with hobbies and grandchildren and early bird specials. Jennifer leaned forward with the focused attention she brought to complex medical cases. But isn't that what retirement is supposed to be about? Rest, relaxation, enjoying the fruits of your labor? For some people, maybe, I said, thinking about my own struggles with the concept of earned leisure. But when you've spent decades being responsible for other people's lives, for mission success, for national security, stepping away from all that responsibility can feel more like abandonment than reward. Rebecca had been quiet during this exchange, but now she spoke up with the thoughtfulness that had replaced her earlier tendency towards dramatic solutions. Is that why you were so resistant to my help? Because accepting help felt like admitting you couldn't handle responsibility anymore? It was a perceptive question, one that cut to the heart of issues I was still working through with the counselor at the Veterans Center. Partly, I admitted, but also because your help came with assumptions about what I needed rather than questions about what I wanted. David looked up from his laptop where he had been tracking the legal and policy implications of various veteran support programs. That seems to be a recurring theme. People making assumptions about what veterans need instead of asking what they actually want. The assumption problem goes both ways, Tom pointed out. Civilians assume we need to be taken care of, and we assume civilians can't understand what we've been through. Both assumptions create distance instead of connection. Maria appeared at our table with fresh coffee and a plate of her latest creation, small pastries she'd developed specifically for our morning meetings. They were designed to be eaten easily while talking, and she'd named them strategy bites, in honor of our tendency to approach every topic like a planning session. "How's the new volunteer coordination working out?" she asked, settling briefly into the extra chair we always kept available for her when business was slow. "Better than expected," I said, thinking about the 20 hours a week I was now spending at the Veterans Center. We've matched 8 veterans with local businesses this month, and 3 of them have already moved into full-time positions. The work had become exactly what I needed without knowing I needed it. It used my skills in strategic thinking, personnel management, and crisis resolution, but without the crushing weight of military command. I was helping people navigate transitions rather than life-and-death situations, and the difference in stress levels was remarkable. "The housing initiative is gaining momentum too," Rebecca added, pulling out her tablet to show us the latest statistics. "We've helped 12 veteran families find appropriate housing in the past 2 months, and 3 local landlords have agreed to participate in the rent subsidy program." Her transformation had been as dramatic as mine, though in a different direction. Instead of stepping back from responsibility, she'd stepped into new kinds of responsibility that aligned with her skills and interests. She discovered that her need to be useful could be channeled into genuinely helpful directions when she took the time to understand what help was actually needed. "The healthcare partnerships are developing nicely as well," Jennifer reported. "We've got 4 regional hospitals now participating in the trauma-informed care training, and the veteran-specific support groups are expanding." She'd found her own way to bridge her professional expertise with the veteran community's needs, developing programs that served both populations while advancing her own understanding of how military service affected long-term health outcomes.
"That's the key to all of this," I said, gesturing around the table at our unlikely group. "Understanding that effective help requires understanding the people you're trying to help." "Speaking of which," Rebecca said with a grin, "you'll never guess who called me yesterday." The tone of her voice suggested this was going to be either very good news or very entertaining news, possibly both. "Tell us," Jennifer said, settling back with her coffee like someone preparing for a good story. "Clarissa Henderson," Rebecca said, watching our faces for recognition. "One of the women from that morning, the blonde one's friend." I felt a familiar tightness in my stomach, remembering the humiliation of that confrontation and the way the three women had tried to diminish me in front of the entire cafe. What does she want? To apologize, first of all, Rebecca said quickly, seeing my expression, but also to ask if she could volunteer with our housing program. The silence that followed was filled with various expressions of surprise and skepticism. She wants to volunteer? Tom asked, his voice carefully neutral in the way that suggested he was working hard not to reveal his opinion of this development. Apparently, Rebecca continued, what happened that morning had a bigger impact on her than we realized. She's been thinking about it for months, and she finally worked up the courage to reach out. What kind of impact? David asked with the careful precision of someone evaluating potential legal implications. The kind that makes you reevaluate your priorities and your assumptions about other people, Rebecca said. She told me she'd never really thought about what military service meant or what veterans might need when they transitioned to civilian life. She'd never considered that her assumptions about people might be completely wrong. Jennifer was nodding slowly. That tracks with what we know about cognitive dissonance. When people have their assumptions challenged dramatically, it can lead to genuine perspective changes. Or it could be guilt-driven performative charity, Tom said bluntly. People sometimes volunteer for the wrong reasons, and that doesn't help anyone. That's why I told her she'd need to go through the same orientation and training as everyone else. No shortcuts, no special treatment, no assumptions about what she can contribute based on her social connections or financial resources. It was a smart approach, one that recognized both the potential value and the potential problems of accepting help from someone who'd started as an antagonist. I found myself curious about this development, though still wary of the motivations behind it. What did you tell her about me? I asked. Nothing, Rebecca said firmly. I told her that if she was serious about volunteering, she needed to do it because she wanted to help veterans, not because she wanted to make amends with our family. I explained that the program has its own standards and procedures and that personal relationships don't factor into volunteer assignments. Good, I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. If she's genuinely interested in helping, then her reasons for getting interested don't matter as much as her commitment to doing the work properly. Maria had been listening to this exchange with the thoughtful expression she wore when processing complex social dynamics. You know, she said slowly, we've had 3 other people ask about volunteering since that morning, people who were in the cafe and witnessed what happened. Really? Jennifer asked. What kind of people? Different kinds, Maria said. A retired teacher who wants to help with job interview preparation, a young entrepreneur who thinks veterans might benefit from small business development support, an elderly woman whose husband was a Korean War veteran. She wants to help with family support services. That's interesting, David mused. It suggests that witnessing the confrontation and resolution had a broader impact than just on the people directly involved. It makes sense, Tom said thoughtfully. Most people don't think about veteran issues until something makes them visible. What happened that morning made a lot of things visible that usually stay hidden. I thought about this phenomenon, about the way one morning's drama had apparently rippled out through the community in ways we were only beginning to understand. It reminded me of military operations, where a single action could have consequences far beyond its immediate tactical objectives. The visibility cuts both ways, I pointed out. People saw veteran issues they hadn't noticed before, but they also saw how easy it is to make assumptions about others based on limited information. True, Rebecca agreed. I've had at least 5 conversations with friends and clients who started questioning their own assumptions about people they encounter. The ripple effect has been significant. Speaking of ripple effects, Maria said with a smile that suggested she had more news to share. I got a call from Vermont Public Radio yesterday. They want to do a feature story about community-based veteran support programs, and they're particularly interested in how civilian-veteran partnerships develop. Oh no, I said immediately, feeling my old instincts toward privacy and anonymity kick in. Maria, please tell me you didn't... Relax, she said, laughing at my obvious panic. I told them I'd need to check with everyone involved before committing to anything, but I think it might be worth considering. Why? Tom asked, though he looked interested rather than opposed. Because what we've built here is working, she said simply. We've created something that helps veterans transition successfully while also strengthening the broader community. Other places might benefit from understanding how we did it. Jennifer was nodding enthusiastically. The healthcare partnerships alone could be replicated in other communities. The trauma-informed care training has applications far beyond veteran services. And the housing model is definitely scalable. We've already had inquiries from 2 other Vermont towns about implementing similar programs. David looked up from his laptop, where he'd apparently been taking notes again. The legal clinic model is definitely something that could be adapted to other regions. The key insights about cultural competency and communication styles aren't geographically specific. I found myself considering the possibility, weighing my natural inclination toward privacy against the potential benefits of sharing what we learned. What would the story focus on? I asked. The process, Maria said, how a simple misunderstanding in a coffee shop led to a deeper conversation about community support systems, how people with different backgrounds and expertise came together around a shared commitment to helping veterans transition successfully. Wouldn't they focus on the dramatic confrontation? Tom asked skeptically. They might mention it as a catalyst, Maria admitted, but the real story is what happened afterward, how conflict led to understanding, how assumptions led to education, how individual efforts led to systematic change. It was an appealing way to frame the story, one that emphasized growth and collaboration over drama and conflict. But I was still hesitant about the level of public attention it might bring. Can I think about it? I asked.
Of course, Maria said. But while you're thinking, consider this. How many other communities have veterans who are struggling with transition issues and civilians who want to help but don't know how? How many places could benefit from seeing a model that actually works? The question stayed with me as our conversation moved on to other topics. Updates on specific veteran families, planning for an upcoming community fundraiser, discussion of policy changes that might affect local programs. But underneath the practical discussions, I found myself grappling with larger questions about visibility, service, and the difference between seeking attention and accepting responsibility for sharing knowledge. After the others had left for their various obligations, I stayed at the table with Maria while she cleaned up the remnants of our meeting. The cafe had emptied out except for a young man with a laptop in the corner and an elderly couple sharing a newspaper by the window. "Maria," I said finally, "can I ask you something?" "Always," she said, settling back into her chair with the ease of someone who'd learned that our conversations often continued long after the official meeting ended. "That morning, when everything went wrong with Rebecca and then with that woman, did you plan the command special reveal?" She smiled at the question, but it was a complex smile that suggested the answer wasn't simple. "I'd been thinking about it for weeks," she admitted. "I could see that you were dealing with people who didn't understand who you were or what you'd contributed. I knew about your military background because I'd asked, and I knew about your generosity because I'd experienced it." "But you waited," I said. "You let me handle the situation first." "Because you're perfectly capable of handling yourself," she said simply. "You didn't need me to rescue you. But when that woman made her final comment about nursing coffee all morning, I realized that the situation had moved beyond personal conflict into community education." "Community education?" "Everyone in that cafe learned something that morning," Maria explained. "They learned that appearances can be deceiving, that assumptions can be wrong, that respect should be based on character rather than consumption patterns. They learned that military service involves sacrifice they might never fully understand, and that veterans deserve better than indifference or pity." I thought about the people who'd been in the cafe that morning, about the conversations that had followed, about the volunteers who'd emerged and the programs that had developed. "And you think sharing that story more widely would have similar educational value?" "I think it might," Maria said carefully. "But only if it's told in a way that emphasizes the lessons rather than the drama. Only if it focuses on building understanding rather than seeking entertainment."
And you trust the radio people to do that? I trust you to make sure they do that, she said with a grin. You're a general. I'm pretty sure you can handle a few journalists. The confidence in her voice made me laugh, but it also made me think. Maybe the story wasn't really about me or my privacy concerns. Maybe it was about the potential to help other communities build similar bridges between veteran and civilian populations. All right, I said finally. Set up the interview, but I want to talk to them first about how they plan to approach the story. Deal, Maria said immediately. And Sarah, thank you. For what? For letting a coffee shop owner become part of something bigger than coffee, she said simply. For showing me that community building isn't about just providing a gathering place. For teaching me that sometimes the most important customers are the ones who don't spend the most money. Thank you for creating a place where that could happen, I replied. For seeing value in simplicity, for respecting quiet generosity, for understanding that community is built one genuine interaction at a time. We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the late morning light shift across the cafe's mismatched furniture and hand-painted signs. The place had become more than just a business, or even a gathering spot. It had become a symbol of what was possible when people took the time to see beyond surface appearances and immediate assumptions. Maria, I said eventually, there's something else I want to discuss with you. What's that? I've been thinking about expanding the Tuesday and Friday meetings, making them more formal, more structured, creating something that could serve as a model for other communities. Her eyes lit up with interest. What did you have in mind? A monthly community forum, I said, rotating topics, different speakers, but always focused on building connections between veterans and civilians. Education, collaboration, mutual support. Here, in the cafe? If you're willing. We could use the back room for larger groups, bring in speakers from the regional veterans organizations, maybe even develop programming that could be replicated elsewhere. Maria was already nodding enthusiastically. I love it. What would you need from me? Space, coffee, and your talent for making people feel welcome. Everything else we can figure out as we go. Consider it done, she said immediately. When do you want to start? Next month, I said, feeling the familiar energy that came with planning something new and potentially impactful. I'll reach out to the Veterans Center about potential speakers and topics. Rebecca can handle publicity and logistics. Jennifer can coordinate with healthcare providers. David can address legal and policy issues. And Tom can help with veteran outreach, Maria added. This could really be something special. As I gathered my things and prepared to leave, I realized that the morning's conversation had crystallized something I'd been struggling with for months. Retirement didn't have to mean withdrawal from meaningful work. It could mean finding new ways to apply decades of experience and expertise. It could mean building something sustainable and impactful without carrying the weight of command responsibility. The brass nameplate on the table had been joined by a small plaque on the wall, donated by the Veterans Center in recognition of Sunrise Ground's contribution to community veteran support. It read simply, "Where service continues," and underneath, in smaller text, established by General Sarah Williams and the Tuesday Morning Strategic Coffee Council. Some mornings I still ordered just black coffee and sat quietly with a book, enjoying the simple pleasure of solitude in a welcoming place. But most mornings, the table filled with people who learned that the best way to honor military service was to ensure that veterans never had to navigate civilian life alone. We built something that mattered, something that lasted, something that proved that retirement could be another form of service rather than an end to service. And every time someone new joined our group, whether veteran or civilian, volunteer or beneficiary, I remembered the lesson that had started it all. Never assume you know someone's story based on their coffee order. The quiet person in the corner booth might be exactly the person your community needs. if you take the time to ask the right questions and listen to the answers with genuine respect. The command special was still on the menu, though Maria had added a note explaining that proceeds supported local veteran services. But more importantly, it had become a symbol of what was possible when people moved beyond assumptions to create genuine understanding and mutual support. It represented the best kind of command, not the power to control others, but the influence to help others discover their own capacity for service and connection. Sometimes the most important battles are fought not with weapons or authority, but with patience and persistence, and the quiet conviction that everyone has something valuable to contribute. Sometimes the greatest victories are measured not in territory gained or enemies defeated, but in communities strengthened and relationships built, and people empowered to help each other thrive. That's what I learned in a coffee shop in Vermont, where a misunderstanding about money became an education about respect, and where 3 months of humiliation and revelation and growth proved that the best commands are the ones that create more leaders rather than more followers. 2 years had passed since that fateful morning when my daughter tried to give me an allowance and a stranger tried to shame me for nursing a cup of coffee. As I stood at the podium in the Millbrook Falls Community Center looking out at an audience of nearly 200 people who'd gathered for the annual Veteran Civilian Bridge Conference, I couldn't help but marvel at how far we'd all come. The conference had grown from our modest monthly forums at Sunrise Grounds into something that drew attendees from across New England. Today's audience included veteran service coordinators, mental health professionals, business owners, local government officials, and dozens of veterans and their families. But more importantly, it included people who'd simply learned that supporting veterans wasn't just a nice gesture. It was an investment in community strength. When people ask me how the Bridge program started, I began, my voice carrying easily through the room thanks to lessons learned from decades of addressing large groups. I tell them it began with a misunderstanding about the price of coffee. But that's not really where it started. It started with the recognition that assumptions are the enemy of understanding, and understanding is the foundation of genuine support. In the front row, Rebecca sat with her husband David and their 2 children, my grandchildren, who had become enthusiastic junior volunteers in various program activities. Rebecca had found her calling in coordinating housing support for veteran families, and her real estate background had proven invaluable in creating sustainable, affordable housing solutions. She'd also become unexpectedly effective at grant writing, securing over $500,000 in funding for regional veteran programs in the past year. Beside them, Jennifer had driven up from Boston with her partner Sarah, a social worker who'd become involved in veteran family counseling services. Jennifer's work in trauma-informed healthcare had evolved into a specialty practice, and she now consulted with hospitals across 3 states on implementing veteran-specific care protocols. Her monthly visits to Millbrook Falls had become working trips, combining family time with professional development. David's legal clinic had expanded into a full nonprofit organization with satellite offices in 4 towns. He'd discovered a talent for policy advocacy and had successfully lobbied for state-level changes in veteran benefit processing that had reduced wait times and improved success rates across Vermont. His transformation from reluctant family coffee companion to passionate veteran advocate had been remarkable to witness. Near the back of the room, I spotted Maria, who'd become the unofficial coordinator of what people now called the Millbrook model of community-based veteran support. Her cafe continued to serve as the informal headquarters for local veteran services, but she'd also consulted with business owners in other communities about creating veteran-friendly gathering spaces. She'd spoken at 3 conferences this year about the economic and social benefits of community-focused business practices. The Bridge program works, I continued, gesturing to a slide showing statistics from our 2 years of operation, because it's built on reciprocity rather than charity. Veterans aren't clients receiving services. They're community members contributing skills, experience, and perspective while also receiving support for their specific transition needs. Tom Chen and his wife occupied seats in the middle section, surrounded by the core group of volunteers who'd become the backbone of our various initiatives. Tom had officially retired from his civilian job to coordinate veteran outreach full-time, funded by a combination of grant money and community donations. His work focused on identifying newly transitioned veterans and connecting them with appropriate resources before problems developed rather than after. The success stories were compelling. 93% of veterans who participated in our housing program remained stably housed after 2 years. 87% of veterans who engaged with our employment services found work that utilized their military skills within 6 months. Most significantly, participating veterans reported significantly higher levels of community connection and personal satisfaction compared to national averages. But numbers don't tell the whole story, I said, advancing to a slide featuring photographs from various community events. The real measure of success is in the relationships formed, the barriers broken down, and the mutual understanding developed between people who might never have connected otherwise. One photograph showed the monthly community barbecue that had evolved from our formal forums. Veterans and their families gathered with local residents for food, conversation, and informal networking. Children played together while adults shared stories and resources. The event regularly drew over 100 people and had become a highlight of the local social calendar. Another image captured the mentorship program that paired experienced local business owners with veteran entrepreneurs. 8 new veteran-owned businesses had opened in the area since the program began, creating jobs and contributing to local economic development. The mentorship relationships often evolved into lasting friendships and business partnerships. Community integration isn't a one-way process, I explained, moving to discuss the broader impacts of our work. When communities actively support veteran transition, they benefit from the leadership skills, problem-solving abilities, and service orientation that veterans bring to civilian roles. Several veterans in our program had been elected to local government positions, bringing military experience to municipal planning and emergency management. Others had become volunteer firefighters, EMTs, and community organization leaders. The ripple effects of successful veteran integration strengthened the entire community's capacity for addressing challenges and opportunities. In the question and answer session that followed my presentation, a familiar hand went up in the middle of the audience. Clarissa Henderson, the woman who'd initially asked to volunteer after the coffee shop confrontation, now served as coordinator of our family support services. Her transformation had been as dramatic as anyone, from someone who'd never considered veteran issues to someone who had become a passionate advocate for military families. Clarissa, can you talk about how the program addresses the needs of veteran spouses and children? That's one of our most important focus areas, I replied, noting how naturally the question flowed from someone who'd become expert in the topic. Military families serve alongside their service member, and they face unique challenges during transition. Our family support services address everything from school enrollment assistance to spouse employment coordination to helping military children adapt to civilian school environments. Clarissa had discovered a talent for working with military spouses, many of whom had sacrificed their own career development due to frequent relocations and deployment separations. Her program helped spouses identify transferable skills, navigate licensing requirements in new states, and connect with employers who valued military family experience. The children's programs had evolved to include summer camps, after-school activities, and peer support groups for kids dealing with parental deployment stress or transition anxiety. Many civilian families had become involved as volunteers and participants, creating mixed groups where military and civilian children learned from each other's experiences. Another question came from a woman I recognized as a city council member from a neighboring town. What advice would you give to communities that want to implement similar programs but don't know where to start? I said immediately, start with listening. Don't assume you know what veterans in your community need. Ask them. Create opportunities for veterans and civilians to meet as equals, not as service providers and recipients. Focus on building relationships first, and programming will develop naturally from those connections. Also, I added, thinking about our journey, be prepared for misconceptions and setbacks. Community change doesn't happen overnight, and not everyone will understand the value of veteran integration immediately. But persistence and consistency in demonstrating positive outcomes will eventually convince even the skeptics. The conference concluded with a networking reception where attendees could visit information tables representing various aspects of our programming. I moved through the crowd, greeting old friends and meeting newcomers, answering questions and listening to ideas for adapting our model to different community contexts. At the Veterans Center table, "What's that? The radio interview that started all this national attention. Do you ever regret suggesting it?" She considered the question while arranging boxes in her trunk. "Do you regret doing it?" "No," I said, surprising myself with how quickly and certainly I answered. "It's brought resources and attention to veteran issues that we never could have generated locally. The grant funding, the policy changes, the replication in other communities, all of that happened because people learned about what was possible here." "Then I don't regret it either," she said simply. "Sometimes local solutions need to become regional models to have their full impact." The attention had indeed been significant. Our story had been featured in national media, leading to speaking engagements, consulting requests, and policy discussions at the state and federal level. I testified before congressional committees about veteran transition issues and had advised the Department of Veterans Affairs on community-based program development. But the national recognition had never overshadowed the local work that remained the heart of everything we did. The Tuesday morning Strategic Coffee Council still met regularly, though now it often included video participants from other communities implementing similar programs. The monthly forums continued to draw standing room-only crowds. The cafe remained the informal headquarters, where veterans and civilians gathered to solve problems and build relationships. As I drove home that evening, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this point. The morning that had begun with my daughter's misguided concern about my finances and progressed through public humiliation to community transformation seemed almost surreal in hindsight. The woman who'd tried to shame me for nursing a cup of coffee had inadvertently catalyzed something far more significant than she could have imagined. Her cruel assumptions had forced a conversation about respect, dignity, and the value of military service that had rippled through the community and beyond. Rebecca's intervention, motivated by love but built on misconceptions, had led to deeper understanding between family members and ultimately to her discovery of meaningful work that aligned with her values. Jennifer's support had evolved into professional specialization that served veteran families throughout the region. David's reluctant participation had transformed into passionate advocacy that had influenced state policy. Even my own journey had been unexpected. I'd come to Millbrook Falls seeking simple retirement pleasures, quiet mornings, good coffee, freedom from responsibility. Instead, I'd found new forms of service that utilized my experience without overwhelming my capacity for enjoying civilian life. The work was demanding but not consuming. The impact was significant but not dependent on my constant involvement. I'd learned to build sustainable programs rather than indispensable ones, to develop other leaders rather than maintaining central control. At home in my small rental house, I settled into my favorite reading chair with a cup of coffee and the novel I'd been working through. The simple pleasures I'd sought in retirement were still there, but they'd been enriched by the knowledge that quiet moments were possible because meaningful work was being done by capable people who shared common goals. The phone rang just as I was getting comfortable, and I recognized Tom's number on the caller ID. "Sarah," he said without preamble, "I just got a call from the Veterans Administration. They want to fund a pilot program based on our model in 5 communities across the country. They're asking if you'd consider serving as the national coordinator." I set down my coffee and considered the implications of his words. National coordination would mean travel, meetings, bureaucracy, the kind of high-level responsibility I'd deliberately left behind when I retired. "What would national coordination involve?" I asked. "Program development, training, evaluation, some travel to pilot sites, but it would be part-time, consultative rather than operational, more like senior advisory role than day-to-day management." "And local control would remain with local communities?" "Absolutely. The whole point is to support community-based solutions, not impose federal programs." I thought about the veterans we had served, the families we had helped, the communities that had grown stronger through veteran integration. If our approach could help people in other parts of the country, didn't I have a responsibility to share what we'd learned? "Send me the details," I said finally. "I'll consider it." After hanging up, I sat in the quiet of my living room, watching the sun set through the windows and thinking about the unexpected directions that life can take. 2 years ago, I'd been defending my right to order simple coffee and live quietly. Now I was being asked to help shape national policy on veteran transition support. The irony wasn't lost on me. The daughter who'd worried about my financial capacity had become a successful grant writer, securing hundreds of thousands of dollars for veteran services. The woman who dismissed me as a coffee shop cheapskate had unknowingly motivated the creation of programs that now served hundreds of veterans and their families. My phone buzzed with a text message from Rebecca. "Saw the conference coverage on the local news. So proud of what you've built, Mom. Coffee tomorrow at the usual place?" I smiled as I typed back, "Absolutely. Same table, 9 a.m. I'll even spring for pastries." Her response came immediately. "You're a treat. Look at you, big spender." The joke was gentle now, rooted in shared understanding rather than misplaced concern. We'd all learned important lessons about assumptions, dignity, and the difference between helping and enabling. More importantly, we'd learned that family relationships, like community relationships, grow stronger when they're built on mutual respect rather than protective control. As I prepared for bed, I thought about the young Marine I'd met at the conference, struggling with transition and feeling disconnected from civilian community. By this time next week, he'd probably have attended his first Saturday hiking group. Maybe joined a volunteer project, perhaps discovered that civilian life didn't have to mean isolation from people who understood military experience. That was the real measure of our success. Not the statistics or recognition or policy influence, but the individual moments when veterans realized they weren't alone, when civilian community members discovered the value of military experience, when barriers dissolved and genuine relationships formed. Tomorrow would bring another day of coffee, conversation, and quiet work toward a goal that had emerged unexpectedly from a morning of family drama and public humiliation. The Tuesday morning Strategic Coffee Council would gather, problems would be solved, relationships would be strengthened, and the work of building inclusive and supportive communities would continue. Some stories end with dramatic victories or profound revelations. This one ended with the satisfaction of sustainable change, meaningful work, and the discovery that retirement could be another form of service rather than an end to service. It ended with coffee, community, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing your life has made a difference in ways that will continue long after you're gone. Sometimes that's the best kind of victory, the kind that multiplies through other people's efforts rather than depending on your continued involvement. Sometimes the most important battles are won not with authority or force, but with patience, persistence, and the unwavering belief that everyone deserves respect regardless of their coffee order. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.